On August the 14th of 2016, the body of 26-year-old Kimberly Harvill was discovered by a passing motorist near a road in Gorman, California. Harvill had been shot dead, and the crime was traced back to the woman's half-sister, 22-year-old Brittany Humphrey. The latter and her boyfriend at the time, 27-year-old Joshua Robertson, had conspired with accomplice Alex Valdez to ambush and kill Harvill. The motive had reportedly been that the woman had witnessed a shooting in Fresno involving Robertson and Valdez, which had occurred a few days prior. In the killing's aftermath, Robertson and Humphrey also kidnapped Harvill's 3 children and went on the run. On August 24th, the children were found unharmed in a motel in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the care of a Good Samaritan who'd alerted law enforcement. The following day, Robertson and Humphrey were arrested in Pueblo, Colorado. Valdez was also eventually taken into custody. Prosecutors considered that there was insufficient evidence to tie Humphrey to her half-sister's fatal shooting, and she was given a 13-year sentence after pleading guilty to 3 kidnapping counts. Robertson and Valdez were sentenced for the killing to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 7. Jeffrey Roberts. 66-year-old California man Jeffrey Roberts drove 700 miles across 3 states in April of 2023 to reach the home of his estranged brother Scott in North Ogden, Utah. Jeffrey rang the doorbell as Scott and his wife Jody were having dinner. A Ring camera captured the ensuing interaction. Jeffrey claimed he was there to see their mother, but Scott told him she wasn't there. In the moments that followed, without warning or provocation, Jeffrey pulled out a 9mm pistol and gunned down his brother. The gunman then walked into the home where he shot and injured Jody. Jeffrey briefly left but was recorded by the Ring camera returning with a 12-gauge shotgun and a brown duffel bag. He used road flares to set the house ablaze and was heard saying, "Empty my bank accounts as quick as you can," while talking on his cell phone. A neighbor alerted the police after hearing the gunshots, and the body cams of responding officers would record flames and thick black smoke coming out of the home. Jeffrey engaged the police in a gunfight as soon as he spotted them. He sustained multiple gunshot wounds, including a fatal one to the head when the police returned fire. In addition to the firearms, Jeffrey had brought a considerable amount of ammo with him, as he was found to be in possession of 23 fully loaded handgun magazines and more than 150 shotgun shells. Officers were able to remove Jody from the flaming house, and she subsequently recovered from her gunshot injuries. A GoFundMe set up in the woman's name described Scott as a hero for trying to fight off Jeffrey in an effort of giving Jody a chance to flee. Number 6. Doris Campos. In June of 2023, Deirdre Hammond went to a home on San Antonio's south side to deliver some tobacco for her mother, 72-year-old Linda Bland. Hammond hadn't been able to reach her mother, and upon arriving at the residence heard her aunt, 68-year-old Doris Campos, yelling, "She's on the floor." Hammond broke through the front door's glass panel and entered the home, whereupon she found Campos sitting on the floor near Bland's lifeless body. Hammond then saw her other aunt, 64-year-old Patricia Sosa, lying on the bed with a gunshot wound to the chest. Both women had been dead for several days. Deputies from the Bexar County Sheriff's Office were called to the scene and arrested Campos, who admitted to shooting Sosa. She reportedly told the police where to find the murder weapon, a .22 caliber revolver, which was located in a plastic bag under the bed and had a single spent shell casing. Campos complained of shortness of breath after her arrest, and she would have her mugshot taken on a hospital bed. She was ultimately booked into the Bexar County Jail in lieu of a $250,000 bond. Campos wasn't, however, immediately charged with Bland's death, as her body didn't exhibit any signs to suggest foul play. A motive for the killing wasn't released. Number 5. Zachary Holston. On May the 26th of 2023, Zachary Holston was about to leave Cath Chemicals, a soap-making company in Sterling Heights, Michigan, which he ran with his half-sister Rita Evans. The latter, her husband and daughter, followed 50-year-old Holston into the parking lot. An argument over paperwork ensued between the two half-siblings. The verbal dispute turned physical when Evans and her family approached Holston's passenger door. Holston drew a pistol, and Evans brandished a firearm from her purse. A gunfight erupted, during which only Evans was struck. She was subsequently pronounced dead at a local hospital. The incident was caught on surveillance video, and Holston was arrested on charges of second-degree murder and felony firearm possession. The man faced life imprisonment upon conviction for the first charge, and 2 mandatory years of imprisonment for the second, reaffirming his lack of tolerance towards gun violence. Macomb County Prosecutor Peter Lucido released a statement in the aftermath saying, "This is not the way for family to settle family business." Number 4. Ross Paul Emik. In March of 2020, an unnamed Arizona man contacted the authorities in Mesa to report that he was being threatened by his brother, 36-year-old Ross Paul Emik. They reportedly had an ongoing feud over inheritance money left to them by their late grandparents, and detectives learned that the brother had already obtained a restraining order against Emik. The latter reportedly believed that his brother shouldn't receive any cut of the inheritance. Law enforcement kept Emik under surveillance, and in July, they were approached by his girlfriend, who told them she feared he was planning to do something. As per the woman's report, Emik had pledged to hire a private investigator to follow his brother. He'd also allegedly claimed that he was committed to wreak havoc on him and his family until he gave up his claim to the inheritance and dropped the protection order. The police contacted Emik and demanded that he abide by the order. The man refused to do as he was ordered, and on August the 14th, he sent an email to his brother threatening to harm him and his family in gruesome ways. Emik seemed to acknowledge the vulnerable legal position that he was putting himself in, but punctuated the threats by writing to his brother, "My consequences will be nothing compared to yours." He then instructed his brother to meet him so that he'd have a chance to stop people from killing his family. The victim presented the email to the police, and Emik was arrested within hours. He reportedly admitted to hiring a hitman while in custody, but later recanted, claiming he'd fabricated the story. Nevertheless, detectives determined that he'd taken out 600 ounces of silver, worth about $17,000, to secure payment for the contract killing. Emik was arrested on charges of theft by extortion, stalking, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and computer tampering. Number 3. Wiley S McKenzie. An elderly man from Largo, Florida, called local law enforcement to his home on a February evening in 2020, reporting that his son was attacking 2 family members with a knife. Inside the residence, the police found 49-year-old Wiley S McKenzie, who'd hacked his mother and stepsister with a machete. The former victim was found dead at the scene, while the latter passed away in a hospital. McKenzie was taken into custody, and investigators found that he'd been involved in a dispute over money with the 2 women. After arming himself with the large blade, he walked into the bedroom while his mother and stepsister were inside and attacked them. McKenzie was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, and the legal proceedings associated with his case were under development as of the latest updates. The 49-year-old had no prior arrests, and the family's next-door neighbor, Daniel Kramer, told a media outlet that he'd never seen or heard anything to suggest the family was having problems. Kramer was quoted as saying they were just normal people. Today's topic was requested by EBG7126. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Connor Gibson. Siblings Connor and Amber Gibson made plans to meet up on November the 26th of 2021 in Hamilton, Scotland, after not having seen each other for some time. The teenage brother and sister had grown up in foster care together but had lately been living apart. Following their meetup, Amber snapped a selfie with Connor, which she sent to a friend and captioned, "My big bro." The duo was seen on CCTV footage walking together side by side, but sometime later, Connor was captured returning alone and stopping to lean on a fence, seemingly exhausted. Amber was never seen alive again. She was reported missing on the evening of November the 26th, and her body was discovered in Cadzo Glen on the morning of the 28th. Connor was arrested 3 days later. Prior to being taken into custody, he'd posted a chilling tribute to Amber on social media, a part of which read, "Amber, you will fly high for the rest of time. We will all miss you, especially me." Investigators determined that once they'd reached a secluded, wooded area, Connor had torn his younger sister's clothes off with the intention of forcing himself on her. He then inflicted blunt force trauma to her head before strangling her to death. Connor denied the charges but was found guilty after a 13-day trial at the High Court in Glasgow. His conviction hinged heavily on surveillance footage and DNA evidence. In addition to him being captured on CCTV walking with Amber, he was also recorded in the area of the homeless shelter where he was living. He was seen disposing of several items, including a blood-stained coat that eventually helped secure the guilty verdict. Additionally, Connor's DNA was found on his sister's shorts, which had been forcibly ripped off. Following the verdict, delivered in July of 2023, a judge told 20-year-old Connor, "Your sister, the last person she saw was you strangling her. It was depraved, and you will pay a heavy price for that." The man's sentencing was scheduled for September of 2023. We have more cases from a previous video lined up for you after number 1. Stay tuned if you'd like to watch some more. Number 1. Ruckinger family. Leading up to the fall of 2013, Pennsylvania woman Josephine Ruckinger had been estranged from her family for roughly 2 decades, following a long-standing feud over inheritance. Multiple sources reported that Josephine had developed hatred toward the family. The conflict reportedly stemmed from Josephine moving her grandmother in with her and Jeffrey prior to her passing away in 2007. Other family members reported that bonds, jewelry, and hefty sums of cash had disappeared from the elderly woman while she was under the Ruckingers' care. On September the 27th of 2013, Josephine and her husband, Jeffrey, both aged 43, went to her parents' home in rural Asheville with a plan to kill everyone who was inside. When Josephine's mother, 64-year-old Roberta Frew, opened the door, she reportedly exclaimed, "Oh my God, they have guns!" Moments later, Josephine shot her at point-blank range with a sawed-off shotgun. Josephine's brother, 47-year-old John Frew Jr., reached for a gun but was fatally shot by Jeffrey multiple times in the chest with a .22 caliber revolver. John Sr. grabbed a pistol, not realizing who the intruders were. As he made his way towards the commotion, he noticed a shotgun pointing in his direction, at which point he fatally shot Josephine, his daughter, in the head. Jeffrey then fired a shotgun at him from the trailer's kitchen, but John Sr., who wasn't hurt, responded with shots of his own that struck Jeffrey in the head, killing him. 4 family members died in the conflict's wake, and John Sr. called the police after the shooting had stopped. A search of the Ruckingers' Suzuki Esteem station wagon produced a large amount of ammunition, a gas can, and a can of lighter fluid. Number 7. Maria Lulu Sosa. Texas man Ramon Sosa first met his wife, a Mexican-born personal trainer named Maria, at a nightclub in Houston in 2007. When they eventually got married in April of 2010, Maria, who had reportedly been in the United States on a short-term visa, was able to gain full citizenship, and they subsequently went into business together when Ramon opened up a boxing gym. Then a few years later, in 2015, Maria indicated to Ramon that she wanted a divorce, citing the couple's financial troubles as the reason behind her decision to end their relationship. Shortly thereafter, a friend of Ramon's revealed that he'd been approached by Maria, who reportedly offered him $2,000 to kill her husband. Shocked and confused, Ramon contacted the police and began collaborating with federal agents on a sting operation aimed at gathering enough evidence to arrest Maria in connection to her murder-for-hire plot. Maria met with an individual whom she believed to be a hitman, but was actually an undercover police officer. To deceive the woman into believing her husband's assassination had been completed, investigators took a picture of an artificially bloodied Ramon lying in a shallow grave and sent it to her. She was eventually arrested on a charge of solicitation of murder. It was later detailed how Maria had concocted the plan to murder her husband in order to inherit the fortune tied to his boxing gym. She ultimately pleaded guilty to her charges and was sentenced to serve 20 years in a Texas state prison. Number 6. Tracy Grissom. On May the 15th of 2012, Alabama woman Tracy Grissom went to the Binion Creek boat landing at Lake Tuscaloosa and fired 6 gunshots at her ex-husband in front of witnesses. Subsequent reports detailed how 2 of the bullets struck the victim in the back of his arm, while 2 others entered his back, killing him instantly. Prior to his death, the 28-year-old man reportedly faced criminal charges in connection to allegations of assault that had been made by Grissom during the course of their relationship. In her interviews with investigators, the woman maintained that she'd carried out the shooting as a form of retaliation against her alleged abuser. Grissom's legal defense team further argued that, due to her husband's repeated instances of assault, she'd begun suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which ultimately served as a contributing factor in her making the decision to kill him. In Grissom's ensuing trial, however, prosecutors from the state's attorney general's office claimed that her assault accusations against her ex-husband were false, and that she'd actually killed him in order to collect a $103,000 life insurance policy, of which she was the sole heir. In September of 2014, Grissom was convicted of murder and consequently sentenced to 25 years in prison. Number 5. Heather Mack. On the night of August the 7th of 2014, Indonesian police received reports of a bloody suitcase having been left in the trunk of a taxicab outside the St. Regis Hotel in Nusa Dua, Bali. Upon inspecting the suitcase, officers discovered that the body of a female victim, Sheila von Weiss Mack, had been stuffed inside of it. The police learned that the case had been placed in the trunk of the cab by a pair of suspects, identified as Tommy Schaefer and his girlfriend, Heather Mack, who was also the victim's daughter. It subsequently emerged that Mack had accompanied her mother on a vacation to Indonesia before secretly booking a flight for Schaefer to come as well. At the time of the trip, Mack and her mother had been involved in a heated dispute in which the latter was seeking power of attorney over her daughter. If awarded legal authority over Mack, she reportedly intended to force her to terminate her pregnancy, as she didn't approve of her relationship with Schaefer. In an alleged effort to subvert her mother's control, Mack, along with Schaefer, killed her in her hotel room with what was described as a metallic blunt object. After the authorities had found the woman's body in the suitcase, they arrested the 2 suspects at a nearby motel. It was later revealed that Mack was the beneficiary of a $1.6 million trust fund from her mother, which investigators believe to have been the primary motive behind the killing. Schaefer and Mack were ultimately sentenced to 18 and 10 years in prison respectively, following their 2015 convictions on charges of premeditated murder. Number 4. Kenneth Atkinson. On August the 15th of 2020, Oregon man Ray Atkinson Jr. and his fiancée, Natasha Newby, were beaten to death inside the Bend home that had previously belonged to the former's father, who had passed away a year earlier. Concerned friends of the couple eventually came upon their bodies in the basement, and Deschutes County officials subsequently launched an investigation into the matter, which was classified as a double homicide. Although investigators immediately suspected that Atkinson's brother Kenneth might have been responsible for his and his partner's murder, they were unable to pursue criminal charges against him for over a year due to a lack of evidence. Court records indicated that Ray Atkinson Sr. had left behind a $400,000 inheritance, but had neglected to draft a will prior to his death. The absence of a legally binding document to officially distribute the man's wealth caused Kenneth and his brother to become embroiled in a dispute over which one of them was the estate's true heir. Detectives postulated that Kenneth might have resorted to killing his brother, thereby inheriting the entirety of his father's estate himself. By October of 2021, the police had finally collected enough evidence to support their theory, and they filed 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of first-degree conspiracy to commit murder against Kenneth. The latter was arrested along with his nephew, who is accused of assisting in the murders in exchange for an undisclosed share of the inheritance money. Number 3. Kamaya Hassell. Shortly before 11 p.m. on December the 31st of 2018, Tyrone Hassell III, an active duty sergeant in the United States Army, left a family dinner party in St. Joseph Township, Michigan, to bring his wife a plate of food. The latter, 22-year-old Kamaya Hassell, was also a member of the Army and had reportedly been stationed with her husband at Fort Stewart in Georgia. According to subsequent reports, Hassell III was fatally shot in the head and neck shortly after departing from the family gathering. Following an investigation into the incident, the police identified Jeremy Kular, another soldier stationed at Fort Stewart, as the individual responsible for Hassell III's killing. The authorities also accused the victim's wife of being directly involved in the murder plot. It subsequently emerged that Kamaya and Kular had been involved in a romantic affair with one another and had devised a plan to eliminate Hassell III to allow them to continue their relationship. As was detailed by the Army Times, military officials provide a $100,000 death gratuity to next of kin when a service member dies while on active duty. Investigators expressed their belief that the financial gain associated with the death of Kamaya's husband served as an additional motive for the two suspects. Following a 3-day murder trial that saw 23 witnesses for the prosecution, Kamaya was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kular pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in July of 2019, and he consequently faced a sentence of 65 to 90 years behind bars. Number 2. Joanne Hussey. Englishwoman Joanne Hussey broke into her grandmother's West Yorkshire residence on the night of May the 7th of 2007 and proceeded to brutally murder her with a garden spade. According to court documents associated with the case, the 77-year-old victim, named as Annie Garbett, sustained a multiple of injuries during her granddaughter's attack, including fractures to her ribs, sternum, and larynx. During the ensuing police investigation, local authorities learned that in 2006, Garbett's daughter Maureen, who was Hussey's mother, had been granted power of attorney over the elderly woman after she was diagnosed with dementia. Over the course of the following year, Maureen allegedly stole thousands of dollars from her mother's bank accounts. Concerned that her grandmother's life savings might be depleted by her residential care payments, Hussey devised a plan to murder her in order to inherit the money herself. Following a trial at Leeds Crown Court, Hussey was unanimously found guilty of murdering her grandmother and was consequently sentenced to life in prison. Although Maureen was convicted of stealing approximately $20,000 from the victim, she was spared jail time to allow her to look after Hussey's disabled daughter. Number 1. The death of Richard Oland. The lifeless body of Canadian businessman Richard Oland was found lying face down in a pool of blood at his New Brunswick office on the morning of July the 7th of 2011. Sergeant Mark Smith of the St. John Police Force later testified in court that the crime scene was one of the bloodiest of his career, with the most blows to a victim he'd ever seen. Upon examining Oland's corpse, a forensic pathologist counted a total of 45 wounds to his hands, neck, and head. It was ultimately concluded that 69-year-old Oland had been bludgeoned to death by an assailant wielding a sharp-edged weapon of some kind. Shortly after the discovery of the murder scene, the police began conducting interviews with members of the Oland family, including the victim's wife and children. Video footage of the police's interview with the victim's son, Dennis, showed the latter giving a detailed account of his activities during the day prior to Oland's death. At the midpoint of the surveillance video, a St. John detective informed Dennis that they believed he was responsible for his father's murder, an accusation which he categorically denied. Investigators detailed how prior to his death, Oland had amassed a fortune amounting to approximately $37 million as the 6th-generation scion of the Moosehead Brewery Company. Dennis was accused of committing his father's murder in order to inherit his share of the massive estate. Following his criminal trial, the longest and most expensive trial in the city of St. John's history,
Dennis was convicted of second-degree murder and consequently sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. However, upon filing an appeal of his conviction, Dennis was granted a retrial, which took place in the summer of 2019. His defense was able to establish a reasonable doubt as to whether Dennis could have been at the scene of the crime when it occurred, and he was ultimately exonerated of the murder charge. The St. John police force faced considerable criticism for the sloppy investigative work that had led to their identification of Dennis as a suspect. Provincial Court Judge Ronald LeBlanc claimed that the police had failed to establish a motive for Dennis to kill his father, as it was Connie, Oland's wife, who stood to receive the $37 million inheritance, not Dennis himself.
Thanks for watching. If you could be an honorary family member for a month, would you rather be adopted by the Addams family or the Manson family? Let us know in the comments section below.